Thank you for tuning in to The Political Soup, where you hear editorial about the issues of the day and political philosophy. Your hosts are Nick Alex, our progressive, Dana and Pugh, our conservative, Paul Laws, our classical liberal, and here is our moderator and your host, John Toll.
Hello again, and welcome back to the Political Soup podcast. I am your host, John Toll, and we have the usual suspects down below. Danon, who's going a little low-tech today, Nick and Paul, and you'll find out which side of the fence they're on once we get started. Today's topic is going to be about the debt ceiling, and President Obama dares Republicans to breach debt limit is the emotionally heightened title over there. It's on talkingpointsmemo.com. We'll get the link down below. Basically, I'm going to make this real short. Obama wants the debt ceiling raised. There's a lot of opposition to that, and well, you'll see some mudslinging going on here in just a few seconds. So we're going to start out the show with Danon, actually. So Danon, I kind of want to get your take on this.
Yeah, this makes me angry. The second paragraph of the story has a quote from Obama from his press conference. If I can read that, unless you'd like to.
Go for it.
It says, if congressional Republicans refuse to pay America's bills on time, Social Security checks, veterans benefits will be delayed, Obama warned. We might not be able to pay our troops or honor our contracts with small business owners. Food inspectors, air traffic controllers, specialists who track down nuclear materials would not get their paychecks. Investors around the world will ask if the United States is in fact a safe bet. Markets could go haywire. Interest rates would spike for anyone who borrowed money.
Now, why does that make you angry?
Because the federal budget is $4 trillion, and we're still, every time a budget battle comes up, and this happens at the federal level, the state, the local, the county, every level of government, the first thing that politicians, particularly Democrat politicians, do to keep the budgets up is to say, oh, well, your police and fire service is going to be cut on the state and the local level. On the federal level, Social Security and the veterans benefits are going to get cut. They run to things that are going to get a lot of public support and that really aren't the large share of the problem. Out of a $4 trillion budget, you can't tell me that we can't find anything to cut other than veterans benefits. I understand his point that if for government shutdowns and for various defaults and such, I mean, there are rules in place and paychecks don't go out and so forth. But this kind of implies that either we have to raise the debt limit or some basic services are going to get cut. And I think that's a false choice, and it just drives me nuts.
Well, what's the other choice? What's the alternative?
There are countless redundant programs that could be cut. There are grants. There are all kinds of welfare programs which frankly aren't needed. I'm not saying none of them are needed, although I probably would say that. But I'm not saying that all of them have to be cut. I'm not planting my flag there, but $4 trillion. I cannot, if you gave me $4 trillion, I could not figure out how to spend that, even if they included giving the money away to people. This is a lot of money, and for us to be talking about raising the debt limit because we just have to spend more it blows my mind. I mean, this is like if I'm making $50,000 a year and I have a credit card debt of $300,000. And $30,000 new a year, and I'm calling the credit card company saying, oh, you have to raise my debt limit or I won't be able to eat. Well, maybe that's not the problem. Maybe I need to stop spending money.
All right, Nick, let's hear your take on this. And Nick, if you wouldn't mind starting out by giving a little more, because you have some financial background, I'd like to hear a little bit more of detailed definition of what the debt ceiling is. I mean, I think everybody has a general idea, but...
So, I mean, if you think about it, the government goes out to the financial markets and they issue debt instruments. It could be short-term debt instruments like T-bills. It can be long-term debt instruments like T-bonds. And basically, what it basically does is, the government is pledging future revenues as a way to pay people that hold this debt. and in return for them giving them principal now. So if I'm paying if it's $100 bond, for example, I'll use really small numbers, but $100 bond, the bondholder's giving the government $100, and then the government pledges to give that $100 back, plus during the time that it's owed to pay interest. So it's a simple debt instrument, just like a company can issue bonds or anything like that. What we have in Congress is a authorization of how many of those bonds and T-bills and T-bonds, T-notes that the Treasury can issue to the public for money in return for future payments. I'm not sure what the actual debt limit is right now. It's like $12 trillion or $13 trillion. So that's what the Treasury is authorized to do by Congress, to go out to the market and have that much debt outstanding at any one given time. What's happening is, clearly we've been running budget deficits. The budget, the outlays of the government are higher than the income for revenues, the intakes. So to make up those deficits and to pay the bills that we have to pay, right now, we need to borrow money, and that's what the bonds do. But in order to fund the remainder of 2013, we would need to issue debt higher than what the current debt limit is that Congress has authorized. And so that's what the fight's about, is how do we, what do we do when we reach the actual amount? Again, if it's $13 trillion, forgive me if I'm wrong there, but let's just say it is $13 trillion. What do we do then? Because clearly the budget for the year that's authorized through October has more spending than what revenues are going to come in, and without excess debt, then you're going to have to figure out who to pay, because you can't pay everybody.
Okay, so what's your take on the article or the idea of raising the debt limit?
Well, so here's the deal, right? We're talking about legislation that's already passed. This is programs that were already funded. So Congress has already authorized the actual spending of this money. What they haven't done is authorize the ability of the government to raise this money. So it'd be a couple ways to do it. You can raise your revenues through higher taxes, or you can continue to use debt, knowing that at some point you're going to have to pay that debt back. So it's one choice or another. In my view, Congress has already decided to obligate the government through these programs, and have already approved them. And if they choose not to raise the debt limit, then they're talking out of both sides of their mouth. Okay.
And Paul, what's your stance on this?
Well, I actually agree with Barack Obama on this one. In 2006, he said that we came here and we are wanting to raise the debt limit again, and it shows a lack of leadership that we're going through this again. Paraphrasing. So I agree with him in 2006. Unfortunately, he's changed his mind on that, and he wants to raise the debt ceiling again. But the problem is that we have just too much spending. It's not an issue of borrowing more. We have spending, and Congress is just asking for spending cuts. Well, actually, they're not even asking for spending cuts. They're asking for slower growth in order to raise the debt ceiling. And frankly, I think it's wrong to raise the debt ceiling. I think we need to take care of our problems now rather than kicking the can down the road. But the reality is that probably what is going to happen is they're going to raise the debt ceiling. I just hope they get at least some sort of a cut out of it.
Well, do you believe that there's a way to instead, and I know you're not really a proponent of raising taxes, but as Nick said, you have to pay the obligations that were already promised. And maybe I misunderstand this, but either you raise taxes, as Nick said, or you do this, which is raise the debt ceiling. Do you think that that's a false set of possibilities? Is there some other way to reconcile this?
Yeah, of course. I believe it's a false set of possibilities. I mean, yes, not raising the debt limit will stop new funding. Underline that, new funding. But the reality is there's a lot of funding or a lot of programs that will just continue to go on because they're authorized.
Where are they going to get the money to pay for them, though? I think that's the issue, is that you cannot finish even this budget year without issuing more debt. That the Treasury doesn't have the cash to pay the bills through October, which is the fiscal year, right? So, so the issue then becomes, you either have to go and cut the programs that make up the preponderance of the budget, which are Medicare, Social Security, and our military spending. Those three items by far represent the majority of the money that we spend.
Well, I would love it if they'd cut them, but frankly, they won't.
Well, of course they won't, because
nice.
It's not popular. None of those three would be popular to cut for different constituencies. But that's the thing. It's like, okay, run on cutting those programs, but instead of actually voting on to reduce the programs, they're funding those. They're authorizing those programs to go forward as is, but then they're saying, I'm not going to give the government the appropriate resources to actually pay for those bills. So, again, this is where I feel like we have Congress talking out of both sides of their mouth. They're saying, oh yes, we should continue spending X trillion dollars on our military. We should continue to fund Social Security as is, or pay Social Security benefits as is, without raising the retirement age. You can look at any number of those top three programs that represent the lion's share of what we spend, and say that, oh yeah, I voted for that, but then on the other side of the mouth, you're not giving the government the appropriate resources to actually go out and execute those programs. So how are you supporting those programs without actually providing the resources? That doesn't really, it seems to me that it's a hypocrisy.
On whose part? Who actually voted for these things and is now opposing any kind of debt limit increase?
Congress has authorized the budget for the fiscal year. So that means that both houses of the 112th Congress, before they went out, said this is what our budget is for this year, and these things are outlined in the different bills that they have provided for each portion of our government. So, they're signed into the law. They're saying that we're authorized to go out and do the spending, but the cash isn't there to spend it. So that's the second piece of it. If you don't have the cash there to spend it, how can you actually continue with these programs?
Well, I think you should underline that fact. We don't have the cash. We're talking about borrowing. We just don't have the cash.
Yeah, but you can get the cash. Borrowing is a function of government. Government does that. I mean, there isn't a major government on the planet that you might think it's wrong, but you have the ability to raise cash through debt, just like you have the ability to raise cash through revenue. So it's no different than a public company. I mean, I work for a public company that has $29 billion worth of debt obligations on its balance sheet, and has future revenue. My company doesn't have $29 billion worth of cash right now to pay off that debt, but it has sufficient cash flows in the future that it will be able to pay off that debt. So,
but at some point in time, your company will actually start paying back that debt, and the reality is it's not looking like that our federal government is going to do that, because I mean they started a lot of this nonsense back in 1913. They continued the nonsense in the 30s, and in the 30s it got preposterous, and it's gained steam up until now. I mean, the reality is we just don't have the money, and we're building up more and more debt, and it's not slowing down. It's not a matter of funding it. It's a matter of too much spending. We're spending just too much.
We'll continue. We'll continue to build debt as long as we have budget deficits. The moment that we have budget surpluses, we will stop building debt. That's the way it works.
Well, that's clear, but the problem is we've had what, one budget surplus and since the 30s. That's crazy.
Let me ask for a clarification, and then I'm going to give this to Dana because he had a point to make. But basically, the way that the government works, and again, correct me if I'm wrong, is that they decide on all the things that they want to spend money on, and then they decide on what the actual budget is as a whole and what they want to actually fund. So you've got a situation where instead of saying, okay, we have this much money to spend for this particular feature of government, and we're going to actually fill it up with these programs. Instead, they say, well, these are all the programs we want, so now here's our budget. Am I correct there, or is it the other way around? Do they say, okay, here's our limit, and then... And welcome back to the Political Soup Podcast. We had a little bit of a technical difficulty there. Sorry about that. So we'll get you back on track here in just a second. We got the usual suspects still below. Danon with his low-tech action still going on. Nick and Paul. Basically, we were in the middle of talking with Nick about budgets, and I was busy doing hand motions like this just a few seconds ago. But anyway, Nick, if you want to go into that again and discuss about whether budgets are decided in advance or whether they're kind of built on the fly, that's kind of where we were.
Yeah, and I'll try to be really brief with this, and so we can get over to Danon's point. But it's a little bit of both. And I was trying to give the example that if you look at something like Social Security or Medicare, the administrators of those programs pretty much know what they're going to be spending in the next fiscal year. So in that way, there's some certainty as to the amount of money that they will need to administer those programs. But then you have other things, either pet projects or congressman or senator-driven projects for their home state or home district that get added onto the budget. That if somebody wants to build a road to go through their district, or somebody wants to keep a military base open in their state clearly for reasons for their own constituency, then those things get added onto the budget. And so the answer to your question, John, is it's really a bit of both.
Okay, gotcha. So the pork adds up, is what you're saying.
It does, but it's not you could go back and it's those three projects, those three programs: Social Security, Medicare, and military spending. That's the bulk of what your government spending is on the federal level.
Okay. And Danon, you had a point that was a little further back now, but it was something you were about to say, and it got preempted a little bit there. Sorry about that.
Sorry, I was responding to something that Nick had said previously, and I don't remember exactly what he was saying, but I think I can make it as a general point that I think it was when you're talking about the company that you work for and carrying some debt, and Paul had mentioned that but eventually I tried to come up with a balanced yearly budget. And my point is that no private entity, a company or a family or individual could get away with the kind of things that the federal government is getting away with as far as just upping the debt limit. And it goes back to what I had said initially, that politicians can come out and say, well, if we don't raise the debt limit, then people aren't going to get paid and Social Security is going to get cut and all that. Well, fine, but when a company is going into debt and they need a larger line of credit, I mean, they can go to their banks and investors and say, we need more money or we're not going to be able to pay our employees, and work for a while, but at some point you have to lay off employees. At some point you have to make tough decisions. And that goes for families too. If someone loses their job, if you can't pay the bills, at some point you got to make some tough decisions. You got to start eating ramen and taking public transportation or whatever. I mean, life gets difficult, and we're way past that point in the federal level and the state level. Just about every state, certainly the one that we live in. The tough choices have to be made. Maybe they aren't going to be popular. Maybe the citizens that vote for the politicians aren't going to like it, but that's what has to be done.
So my response would be is this. I mean, I would say a couple things. I think one of the worst analogies that you can have is comparing a family to the federal government when it comes to how they manage cash flows and whatnot. I get families are on budgets and families don't have the buying power that a government entity does. And at the end of the day, to me, it's a poor analogy. If you want to compare it to private enterprise, okay, I understand that. So again, the way I look at companies, debt intrinsically isn't bad or good. And I want to make sure that people kind of understand that debt is a way to raise cash. It can be bad if you don't have the right kind of cash flow to support the debt that you're issuing, but it also can be good. So I'll go back to what I was saying about my company. Again, we have $29 billion on the balance sheet. We probably have cash on hand of maybe $3.5 billion. That debt was used to acquire businesses. It was used to build new manufacturing facilities. It was used to create distribution centers. Cash that clearly we wouldn't have all at once, but the strategy of the company is to earn X amount of revenues over the next 30 years or however long the debt period is for our bonds. To be able to service that debt and the interest associated with it. And so when we go to market, the rating agencies look at our strategy and whether or not we'll be able to raise that cash and if it's sufficient enough to pay all of our bills and the debt and interest on top of it. And the rating agencies will give us a credit rating. And so our credit rating is BBB flat, which is an investment grade credit rating. It's not the best rating that's out there, but it's also one that is very sustainable and very stable, and people will pay good money for the debt that my company issues. That's likewise, the government has to do the same thing. It's going to go out to market to people. People are going to be buying these bonds. Usually, they're institutional holders. That could be governments of other countries. It could be any number of things. What they're going to do is look to the rating agencies to say, well, how do I view this debt? Is there going to be enough cash to pay me back in the interest I'm owed? And so when you've looked at historically the rating agencies and what they've provided for the U.S. government, they've given it its highest credit rating, AAA. So those are the things that investors look to when when debt's being issued. So that kind of stuff isn't available to you and me as Joe Blow. When I go to if I need credit, I don't get a credit rating like that. I don't issue bonds. I have to go to a bank and get a loan. That's a little bit different. So that's why I don't think that's a great analogy. But the one versus companies, it is. So.
Well, you know what, Paul? I'm sorry. Go ahead, Dan.
I was going to say, just quickly, that's fair enough as far as credit ratings are concerned, but you kind of nailed it there where you said it has to be sustainable, and just don't see what the government is doing as being sustainable. And if I'm not mistaken, the credit rating dropped a year ago, or maybe 2 years ago now.
It dropped because of the debt limit fight that we just went through.
Yeah, and that was so the Democrats blamed the Republicans, and Republicans blamed the Democrats.
That's what Moody's and S&P reported when they dropped the credit agency. They talked about the political piece of raising the debt limit, because raising the debt limit is also going to be important to probably the fourth biggest expenditure for the federal government, which is interest. So if debt limit can't be raised, then bondholders won't get their money back, and that's what affects credit rating.
I'd have to go back and look at that, but I thought that was pretty tenuous anyway. Like even with the debt limit getting raised, and even if it had been done enthusiastically, I seem to remember the impression that the credit rating was pretty much going to drop.
Well, Paul, let me. What I was going to say, if your credit rating. And Paul, what I'm asking you is, would you like our credit rating to drop, Paul, as a country?
Honestly, I don't care.
Well, what I'm suggesting is if it drops, maybe we'll have less debt because we won't be able to secure as much debt, so we'll have to cut programs. That's what I'm asking.
Well, that's kind of where we're at. I mean, it's my point in saying that I don't care is for that reason. I mean, the reality is, at some point in time, we're going to have to face the facts that we can't spend any more money. We've already spent more than we have, and we have unfunded mandates that are just through the roof. And yes, I realize that they are. I'm anticipating what Nick's going to say. I realize that they are not yet. They're not yet debts, but they're going to be, and we don't have the money to pay for them. We don't have it now, and there is no plan to have it in the future. I mean, we've spent too much. We're taking money from individuals, and that's another thing. The comparison with a government and a company. Well, companies produce. Companies actually make money. Governments have to take their money. And that's another thing that makes this a bad situation, because governments have to forcibly take money in order to service a debt.
They have to forcibly take money in order to provide a service. I mean, the taxation is taxation. It's a form of revenue, and for that revenue, you get a service. It's also like a company. They
if it's
provide
like a company,
for a cause.
how about I opt out? Can I opt out?
No, of course not.
There's my point. It's not like a company, because you can't opt out. It's a monopoly. There is no way around it. You're forced in. And because of the fact that you're forced in, we really need to take a very close look at the programs that we're funding. Frankly, we have to take a step back and say, is this program that we're funding worth borrowing? Well, actually, to take a line from Mitt Romney, is this worth borrowing money from China for? Now, granted, I realize that we don't borrow that much money from China, but still, the point is it worth borrowing money for?
Then articulate it in an election, run on it, and win. That's what it comes down to. People have run against Social Security and Medicare in the past, and they lose. So then you're going to have to figure out if those programs are that popular and that's what people have come to expect, you better figure out a way to fund it. And so we can talk until we're blue in the face about cutting our spending, and I believe that there are certain parts of the budget that we can cut, but we're not going to be able to cut our way to a better tomorrow. It's just not going to happen. So we better be prepared to do the things on the revenue side that we should do in order to make Social Security more solvent, to make Medicare more solvent, and to raise the appropriate funds to grow our. We're going to have to grow our economy so that we have more revenues from taxation.
Well, then I guess we're kind of at an impasse there, because it's impossible to fund government to the degree that it wants, because it's a money pit that you can throw as much money as you have always into, and it'll always spend more.
Hey, we got I would tell you in the late 90s, we got to a place where we were taking in more money than we were spending.
How long did that last?
And it lasted until we decided to cut our income tax rates to such a level that all of a sudden we introduced trillion-dollar deficits again, and then we had 2 wars on top of it. So,
okay, but I'm asking, how long did that last?
It lasted a few years.
The point is, I don't care if it's a Republican or a Democrat. They spend money.
Of course they spend money.
They continually spend money. They spend money they don't have.
But you act or you talk as if you get nothing for the money that we spend. And that's the part that I have issue with. We get lots of things for the money we spend. We get the military that protects us. We get the social safety net to make sure that people aren't without income once they retire. Or
very expensive.
I'm not saying that it isn't expensive. I'm just saying it's not that we don't get nothing for it.
Well, I honestly, I wouldn't buy a pencil for $100. Essentially, you're.
I was just going to make a similar analogy. I mean, you can say you're getting something for. I was going to say a pack of chewing gum for $1,000, but close enough. You can say you're getting something for
better,
it. At some point, it's a poor return on investment.
Well, let me get close to the end of the show here. So I'm gonna read a chunk of the end of this, which is just a quote from Obama, I believe here, and it says, "It seems as though what is motivating this from the House Republicans is more than debt reduction. They have a vision about what government should do and not do. They're suspicious about government policy commitments to make sure that seniors have decent health care as they grow older. They have suspicions about Social Security. They have suspicions about whether government should make sure that kids in poverty are getting enough to eat, or whether we should be spending money on medical research. They have a particular view about what government should do and what it should be. That deal was rejected by the American people when it was debated during the presidential campaign." Now, I guess we could probably say some of that is a little bit biased in the way it's worded, but I'm going to go to Dana on this, and I'm going to just hit each of you once for this, just an opinion on this particular quote, and then we'll probably wrap it up. So, Dana, what are your thoughts on all that?
Yeah, it's just breaking my heart, man. The non sequiturs that if Republicans want spending less, then we'll be okay with starving children. Again, arguments aside about how private industry and charity and all that take care of the poor better than the federal government ever could hope to. Those arguments aside, it's a $4 trillion budget, and we can't come up with anything to cut other than feeding starving children. There's a good website I have no chance of remembering off the top of my head that goes through a lot of these. I'm sure there are several good websites like this, but it goes through a lot of these kinds of spending.
Why don't you add it later on? We can stick it down below once you remember what it is. We'll stick it in the comments.
I can do that. Okay. But it goes through these just millions and hundreds of millions of dollars in grants to some university that nobody's ever heard of in Alaska to study permafrost and whatever. It's just the countless research projects, the countless pork barrel projects. Now, admittedly, a lot of pork barrel spending adds up to pretty much a drop in the bucket. It's not a huge chunk of the federal budget. And I would probably guess that some research funding and arts grants and stuff like that is probably also a drop in the bucket. But it's a start. I mean, it's symbolic if nothing else. Can we at least, in this current economy and with American income and American employment the way it is, can we at least start making a couple of the easier choices like that to save a little bit of money? I mean, that would seem to be a simple place to start, rather than talking about the threats of starving children and starving old people and people not getting medical care and all that.
Okay. Nick, your take?
Yeah, I mean, I'll go back to the facts. You got to talk about the three largest expenditures. You know, we say that the federal budget is $4 trillion, but we're also running a $1 trillion deficit. So the idea that you're going to be able to focus on 5% of the budget and cut your way to this program, or cut this way to a balanced budget, you can't do that unless you address military spending, Social Security, and Medicare. If you don't address those programs, then there is absolutely no way that we will ever get into a situation where we don't need to issue debt. So, if that is the case, and if that's the way we're kind of thinking about it, I think what the president says is right on. Go to the electorate, make your case, articulate it, and win. If you can't do that, then I'm sorry. That's not the way we're going to go about it. So the idea that we're going to hold the debt ceiling hostage and the ramifications to the economy that come along with that, to me it's sour grapes, and it's pretty damn selfish. And so if we're going to all of a sudden, put our credit rating at more risk, and we're going to see interest rates go up for you and me and everybody else that holds a credit card, because America defaults on its debt obligations, not okay. It's absolutely not okay. And so make your case, win the presidency, win back the majority of the Senate, and then that's what you can do. Until then, I don't want to hear it, and I think this is politics at its worst.
All right, and Paul, you get the final say.
Well, actually, one of the points that was mentioned in the thing that you just read was about suspicion. Well, yeah, I am suspicious. I am suspicious of any monopoly, whether it be government or any monopoly. Doesn't matter, especially government, because they have guns. But to Nick's point, it is what it is. You have a Republican Congress. You have a Democrat. Everything else, they can do it, and that's kind of what it is. But one last point I want to make: I beg of President Obama to be consistent and don't lower the debt ceiling.
Don't lower it, or don't.
You didn't.
raise.
Don't raise the debt ceiling. Rather,
Okay.
you didn't do it. You voted against it in 2006. Just say no.
Okay. And looking at that, and like I said, it may be biased in one direction or the other, but talking about how the Republicans have a vision about what government should and should not do, I think is actually a fairly accurate statement. And I think that's part of why we're having this whole conversation, is that there's a difference in opinions on what government should be responsible for and what it should not get its fingers involved with. And that's why we continue to have these conversations every week and with interesting outcomes. So again, guys, thanks for your time. Dana, Nick, and Paul, always good from you guys. Dana, thanks for the low-tech awesomeness. I appreciate it. So guys, have a good night. And for those of you watching, thanks for joining us. Bye-bye.